shifting taking place in our world, and sometimes it does not appear to be that way, but usually when a new season is emerging, the old happens to cry out with a vengeance. And I think that's why we're seeing some of the evil forces that have appeared in recent times in a way like, at least in my lifetime, like never before. But I'm very hopeful because the God of the universe is on the side of justice. He's on the side of righteousness. He's on the side of peace. And more importantly, he did not create a universe for us to destroy each other, to denigrate each other. He created this universe so that we would uplift each other and empower each other with love and compassion and care, and being like a real family. And so thank you for being here on today. We are about to hear one of the top revolutionary voices and advocates for the poor, for the marginalized, for the disenfranchised. I would dare to say not just in this nation, but in this world. Someone who's been working over 50 years in giving her life in service to humanity, representing the folks who don't have a voice, the people who've been exploited, who've been taken advantage of by our systems and by people. And not just people that we think are different from us ideologically, sometimes even by us, because in the fast-paced nature of our society, sometimes we get so busy that we don't see each other. We don't pay attention to each other. And with the addition of technology, it's made it even more difficult. And that's why we keep calling for a focus back on humanity, because our technology is taking over rapidly. And Dr. King forewarned us in '67 needed to take, because he saw what technology and science had done with our world from a positive standpoint, but he also feared what it would do from a negative standpoint if we didn't have the right morals and values, if we did not understand that our humanity was important, if we didn't understand that other-centeredness is even higher than self-centeredness. And so our speaker today, Dr. Marian Wright Edelman, is a special woman to many of us and to my family, to the legacy of advocacy of children. If we don't do something generation, we are wasting time on earth. And so I want to thank her first and foremost as she comes for what she's been doing, unwavering, a lot of fanfare. You know, there are a lot of leaders says law degree. She's a lawyer, a legal defense fund, early in her career representing marginalized, disenfranchised people around racial justice, and began to shift concerning the poor, the hungry, the undernourished, those who did not have adequate housing, health care. She's very humble about this, but I have to say it because my father, very brilliant man, great strategist, and extremely humble, is really who he is today. I would say there were a lot of women who contributed to that, from his mother first and foremost, Alberta Williams King. She was a large part of his strength in those early days as he grew up, and helping to keep him focused and not letting the things that he experienced and saw in the South destroy his spirits and overtake him with the wrong emotions like hate. And then, of course, Coretta Scott King. You know, my dad obviously was concerned about these triple evils, but had not yet spoken out against the war in Vietnam. And it was my mother who really said, Martin, we need your voice in the peace movement, because she had already been involved in it since her college days. And so when everybody else was turning on him, even those in the civil rights movement, leaders of the civil rights movement, because they felt that it was going to undermine the efforts and the gains that they had been making with the Johnson administration. My mother was that encourager. She believed in him. She knew that his voice militarism. And so she, you know, kept nudging. He was always went to India about where we can put some of this food that we waste and throw away and take for granted here in the United States of America, in the bellies of them all over the world. But he saw in his own country, in Marks, Mississippi, he saw what was going on, looking like some of the developing, we don't say third world because that diminishes them, they're developing countries around the world. Said that's right here in our backyard, our neighbors within the United States of America. And so there's a story behind that that she could share. I don't know where she's going with what she will share with us today. In a slight way, I'm kind of promoting her book. It was published last year, and I'm trying to get everybody to get the book because people need to know Coretta Scott King. Yes. She was not just a wife and a partner in terms of a romantic partner and a mother of his children, but she was a powerhouse. She was an activist. She was a leader, a strategist. She was a master convener. And she lent her voice to so many causes and movements in our nation, more so than even my dad. And so in her book, she wrote something about the Poor People's Campaign. And I think it's somewhere around the 13th chapter. She said, fortunately, excuse me, let me back up. He, meaning Martin, wanted to dramatize the hidden face of American poverty. There we go. See, you know, when we talk about certain issues, it's difficult to deal with racism, but then you start moving over the poverty, it gets a little bit more, and then you get to militarism, it's like silence. Poverty, they'll just temporarily interrupt you. Militarism, just totally silent. He wanted to dramatize the hidden face of American poverty. We believe that just as segregation was immoral in a democracy, poverty was immoral in a nation as wealthy as the United States. Fortunately, as Martin and the SCLC were mulling over the issues of the poor, Marian Wright at the time, later Edelman, founder and president of the Children's Defense Fund, that was later in 1973, helped Martin make a way out of no way, as the gospel lyrics promise. Wright, an attorney, was the director of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in Mississippi. She visited Martin in his Atlanta office, bringing with her 4 black farmhands, men who had been jobless since the government farm programs began paying farmers not to grow crops. She proposed that Martin and other religious and labor leaders lead a protest in Washington with a sit-in and a fast at the office of the Secretary of Labor, W. Willard Wirtz. The plan was to protest until the problems of the chronically unemployed were addressed. As Martin and the SCLC mulled Wright's proposal, the fasts and sit-in were thrown out, but the concept of dramatizing the extent of poverty in America seemed workable. The effort would be called the Poor People's Campaign. It would not solely be about blacks, but would include Puerto Ricans, Native Americans, Mexicans, and poor whites. The prospect of establishing a rainbow coalition. I wanted you to hear that prior to Reverend Jackson. That could eventually see beyond racism and challenge the systems that demeaned all persons, excited Martin. The overall objectives were economic security, decent sanitary housing, and quality education for every American. The planning team decided to focus on 10 cities and 5 rural areas. Another woman. Behind the scenes, but a powerful encourager, and worked on the policy side of all of this as a part of that campaign. She was offered a job by my dad, but she turned it down. Can you imagine turning Martin Luther King down by this time in 1967? But she had a mandate. She had a call, and she knew what she had to do. So she stayed in Washington, D.C., and we know, thank God for her doing that, because she's been that force in our nation's capital, working and advocating for children now through the Children's Defense Fund, which she founded and heads since 1973. They're in their 45th year of advocating for children. She keeps us accountable. She enlightens us, she educates us and keeps us accountable. And she has schools that are training and developing young people all over this nation, freedom schools. We just thank you, Dr. Edelman, for who you are, what you represent, being unwavering and never tiring. And a lot of times we talk about people retiring and moving over. I thank God you haven't retired yet. And I know it may be getting close to that time, but she is preparing already. Her legacy will be enormous because there's so many young people who are being seeded and have been seeded who will be perpetuating the work that she's doing. And so let us welcome now Dr. Marian Wright Edelman.
I'm so proud of this woman and of that little Yolanda. You hear her at that rally. It's so wonderful to see the legacy being carried on. So thank you, and thank you all for being here. But you got to go to work, and what matters is what you're going to do when you go back home, because this is the most dangerous time we have lived in since we began a Children's Defense Fund 50 years ago. And I'm not going to have my children and grandchildren fighting these battles all over again. So I'm here today to say, honor Dr. King by finishing the job. And I'm asking everybody, and I want the King Center, I haven't lobbied you yet, but we're going to end child poverty. That is our goal, is ending child poverty. You can't help children without helping their parents. And it became very clear to us a long time ago that was the preventive investment, cost effectiveness argument, and we've been able to get 40, 50 laws on the books through the lens of children, but that's also helping the family. And so we want to finish that job because we still let children be the poorest in America. And I don't want my grandchildren having to struggle with these things. I mean, I want them to learn how to do it, and they've been on their civil rights tours. But all of you today who've come to celebrate Dr. King need to follow him. And we need to follow him and honor him by saying we're going to start with our children, and then we're going to do away with poverty in the richest nation on earth. And so that's the bottom line that I want you to remember. But I'm just very proud to be here and to be moved again. And I think about him every day and often say, what would he be doing? And I just think that we have a lot of lessons to learn from him. I wrote him a very long letter in the last book that I wrote. And I'm going to and I took a little excerpt from it that I want to start with that I did in a column this week trying to remember him. I first heard him when I was at Spelman College and a senior, hated compulsory chapel, and the first thing I did when I chaired the board was to reinstitute compulsory chapel. Because I learned more in chapel. That's where I heard Dr. King, that's where I heard Howard Thurman, that's where I heard Mordecai Johnson and Benjamin Mays. And young people need to know what we think is important. And so I sort of say, listen, you know, I mean, some of these tapes run off in your head, and a lot of those I got through Spelman Chapel and Dr. Mays' Morehouse Chapel. But I heard him first in my senior year at Spelman, and he was just 31 years old. And he'd already gained a national reputation during the successful Montgomery bus boycott. And the profound impact of that hearing I talk to all the time. And one of the things I hope young people will do, I used to keep a diary in a 15-cent notebook. And I got many of those diaries that I found, and they produced 4 or 5 books for me. But you forget so much. But it really is, I was so deeply moved by that initial speech, and I sort of want to talk about it because it vibrated the chords of my freedom and justice hungry soul. And it's not often that great leaders and great turning points in history converge and sweep us up in a transforming movement. I always hated segregation. I always hated not being able to go where anybody could go and any white child could go. And I became a rebel at 4 when my Sunday school teacher took me up to the Bells department store. And she was purchasing, and I saw the water fountain. I was thirsty. I went to drink. I didn't pay any attention to white and black signs. And she saw that I was in the white drinking sign place. And she came and she jerked me away. And I said, what's the matter? And she told me you can't drink there, you have to drink the other. I didn't know about white and black water fountains. But at any rate, I made it a point. I went home and took my little wounded cycle to my mom and dad, and they made it clear it wasn't about me. It was about the system, and that I could do it. I could change it. I could be, I had great adults in my life who always affirmed that whatever the outside world said, you are sacred before God. And no child should be mistreated. And they always said, if you see a problem, don't ask why doesn't somebody do it. You figure out what you can do in responding to a need. But the bottom line is that once I was told that it was, white and black was not water didn't have those colors, I used to go around to all the department stores and every place there was water, and I would switch the signs. And it made me feel so good. And so you can always be creative, and there's not an issue I work with at the Children's Defense Fund that did not come out of my childhood. Immunizations when little Johnny Harrington died after he had lived with his grandmama 3 doors down from the church, stepped on a nail, got tetanus, no tetanus shots. So we now immunize our children, and we've been able to, when Mr. Reagan tried to do away with immunization programs, we were pit bulls, we got it back. And every child needs to be immunized in this country and not sort of die from preventable diseases, but at any rate had great adults. But when I heard him in chapel, and I would encourage young people to keep diaries because you forget so much. And I'm just so grateful that I discovered them 25 years later, and the link hadn't faded. But he became a mentor and a friend, and not just a history book hero or mythical figure, but a crucial way of understanding Dr. King was that he was always human, didn't have superhuman or magical powers. He was a real person, not like many of the old ministers, the other ministers, parents, teachers, neighbors, familiar adults in lives today. He didn't sort of put himself above everything. He didn't have to know everything. He was a great listener. He was able to tell you he was often afraid. I got terrified by police dogs when they were brought out first in Greenwood, Mississippi, on my first trip to Mississippi. And I will go across the street before I would get close to a police dog, and we used to laugh about how he felt going down to that rural Georgia jail with police dogs in the back. But we could share and laugh and say what scared us, but also say how you could say your prayers and get up and try again, knowing you were never alone. He was often unclear about what his next step was going to be, but his faith always prevailed over fear, uncertainty, fatigue, and sometimes depression. And he could share that with young people when we were uncertain and didn't know what we were going to do. It was his human vulnerability and his ability to rise above it that I most remember, including his love for if I can help somebody along the way. And the bottom line, first bottom line of the message I want to leave with you, if you see a problem, don't ask why somebody doesn't do something. Say what can I do? We didn't have any home for the aged in my hometown in South Carolina, but then Reverend Reddick, and we didn't know about Alzheimer's disease, began to wander the streets. And so my dad and mama started one across from our church, and all of us children had to cook and clean. We sure didn't like it at the time. But that's how we learned that everybody was our neighbor. When we saw foster children that didn't have homes, turned out that we took in 12 foster sisters and brothers. And they are still here today. And so I feel so lucky to have been born when I was who I was, with the parents and co-parents that the teachers were, and that the ordinary people of grace in our church who adopted children as community property. And we need to reinstitute that today because too many adults have gone AWOL. And so one of the things we need to do is to get these churches to open up our doors, and vacation Bible schools need to be freedom schools, and Sunday schools, which are duller than sin in too many places, need to be freedom schools. And so the real question here is, what are we going to do to reclaim our children and to make learning and to make faith exciting and relevant to their lives? Dr. King's greatness was his willingness to struggle, to hear, and to see and to act on the truth, and to not give in to fear, uncertainty, and despair. He continued to listen and to grow and never lose hope despite every discouragement from his government and even from some of his closest friends and advisors. And I remember all the time he would say, take the first step in faith. You don't have to see the whole staircase. Just take the first step and leave the rest to God. The first morning I heard him at Spelman, he told us to always keep going forward. And I had a young man grab me at a flower place last week, and he had heard that somewhere, or heard something about it. But he said, you know, he came running out, and he said, if you can't fly, drive. If you can't drive, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But keep moving forward. And we're living in an evil time when they're trying to move us backwards, and we just won't go there. And you've got to commit, if you're going to be here today to celebrate Dr. King, we're not going to go backwards. And we're going to absolutely move forward, and we're going to end child poverty as the next big step. And I'm one of those who believes and knows that the Poor People's Campaign was not a failure. Change is hard, but all those folk on food stamps today, on WIC, on the expanded school, and summer breakfast programs and lunch programs, ought to thank them poor people in the mud in Resurrection City. Because most change comes from follow-up, out of the press, scut work, and that's what we've been privileged to do for the last 50 years. And we've now got, one age by one age, 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, up to 12, up to the 15 and 16, and then we sort of got chipped. We now have 95% of all children covered with Medicaid and CHIP. And you don't do that in the headlines, you do it just being ready when things are ready to move. And most social change, major social change, is not glamorous, it's not a press conference. It's hard homework and follow-up and waiting. And I will just say, I'm jumping ahead of myself, is that God sent us some great rainbows in these terrible clouds of Mr. Trump. And again, because you form relationships and you have your proposals ready, and they're going to always need an extra vote, and when they come in to try to bargain, you can say, this is what we want. And I couldn't believe it, But 3 or 4 weeks ago, in the middle of the budget stuff, I won't name the senators, they called up to say, you won't believe what just happened. We got CHIP renewed for 10 years so that parents don't have to worry about whether their kids are going to get health care. We got a family preservation program we've been trying to get for 15 years to keep children out of foster care and out of home institutions. Open-ended funding, don't tell anybody, but an entitlement, a fully funded entitlement program. We got the child care block grant doubled to $5.8 billion. We got community health centers. I mean, it took my breath away. I said, you sure this is right? I mean, I went and called up 5 other people. You sure that was in that final budget packet? Now, that doesn't mean they won't try to take it away next week. But you have to kind of stay vigilant. But, you just have to be ready and persevere, because real social change is really behind the scenes in some ways, and if you're going to change institutions. But God gave us some encouragement. But going back to what I was writing to Dr. King, he'd been gone 50 years. He still lives with me every day. And I constantly say, what would he be doing if he were here? And we've made a lot of progress, but not enough. But it was such a privilege to know and to work with you and to learn from him and to struggle to end racial segregation, discrimination, and poverty. And just as many Old and New Testament prophets were rejected in the Bible, scorned and dishonored in their own land and times, so was Dr. King by many when he walked among us. And now that you are dead, and I got to go back to just talking to him, which is what I did in the book, many Americans remember you warmly, but you've been sanitized and trivialized. They remember Dr. King, the great orator, but not Dr. King, the disturber of unjust peace. They applaud the Dr. King who opposed evident violence, but not the Dr. King who called for massive, nonviolent demonstrations to end war and poverty and greed and excessive militarism in our national and world houses. They applaud your 1963 I Have a Dream speech, but ignore the promissory note still bouncing at America's Bank of Justice, waiting to be cashed by millions who are poor and non-white. And they forget your repeated nightmares, the deaths of 4 little girls in Birmingham, and the 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi during Freedom Summer and across the South. The cries for black power begun during James Meredith's march against fear, that you and others completed after he was shot. The growing violence in urban ghettos in southern and northern cities, the horrible, relentless violations of your human rights by FBI Director Hoover, the storm of criticism that greeted your opposition to the Vietnam War, which you saw was stealing the hopes and lives of the poor at home and the poor abroad. The outbreak of violence in a Memphis march that you led in support of garbage workers and the resistance of your call for a Poor People's Campaign to end the poverty then afflicting 25.4 million Americans, including 11 million children. We now have more than 40 million people who are poor in America today, and we're going to do something about it, I hope, including more than 13.2 million children through our GDP, although our GDP is more than 3 times larger than in 1968. And the income gap between the rich and poor in the United States continues at historically high levels, and it's higher than every other industrialized and very wealthy country. But he struggled on. Even when he didn't know the way, he would keep struggling to find the right way to respond. As the civil rights leadership splintered, as white Americans tired of black demands, and as the country became preoccupied with Vietnam, and I just marveled at his accessibility and his patience with young people who differed with him, or who were frustrated about the pace of change. And every night during that long Meredith march from Memphis to Jackson, he would listen to Stokely and Willie Ricks and try to convince them that black power and the tone of that was not the right way. And I watched his stricken face when in Greenwood Willie got up to do it, and in Jackson when Stokely got up to do it. But he understood, even if he really thought that that was a hurtful and a not very strategic approach. And he listened as he moved into Chicago to young people. And he knew how to repudiate, the slogans, but at the same time never repudiate the young frustrations. and to try to hear us and to try to work with us and try to bring us along. And I guess I just say, how many adults do that today with our young people? But his accessibility, always movement. And in the 12 years between Montgomery and Memphis, he listened, he learned, he grew, he spoke the truth about what he discerned, and he refused to have his view and his conscience ghettoized. You know, people thought he shouldn't speak out against the Vietnam War. You know, it was black and brown folk who were dying disproportionately in Vietnam, but the war was also wrong. And he watched his friends and his foes attack and abandon him, and that hurt, and people told him to be quiet and to stick to his thing because he was going to jeopardize his domestic agenda. And I know what a hurtful period that was. They said he wasn't an expert on foreign policy, as if we're not smart enough to sort of see all the things our countries do and don't have a right to comment on all of it. And he understood, though, that there was a relationship between all that money in the military and in war and the extraordinary poverty among children of color in the United States of America. I want to just call for us to sort of finish the job. A lot of people love to celebrate him. We need to follow him, and we need to finish what he started. And I'm really here to talk about ending child poverty today. We changed to a Children's Defense Fund because we don't like poor, dependent, non-white adults. We don't like dependent white adults either very much. But it's time to kind of do the job. And so we're going to be issuing a call for an End Child Poverty campaign, and I do hope that the King Center is going to be at the beginning of that, at the top of that. We're working very closely with Reverend Barber, and we are going to be, but he's going to adopt our policy agenda, understanding we need to start with children and with preventive investment. We issued a report on child poverty and the ways in which we could end child poverty in 2015, and we always lay out the facts. And we had the Urban Institute that is respectable do the calculations on 9 policies that we thought would make a huge difference for children, things you won't know about, you all know about. And we got back the answer that if we got investments in these 9 policies, that we could decrease child poverty overall by 60%. We could decrease black child poverty by over 72%. And we could lift the floor for everybody. And at that, we've sent them back now. Now, housing was the single biggest poverty alleviation strategy. And when we began, after the Poor People's Campaign, to follow up with their demands, we decided to do health financing, and we've made huge progress. But if you don't got a place to live, you know, you're still in terrible shape. And so we now have both health, but we've made 95% progress on children and families on health care. But we're reissuing, and we've changed a few of the policies. We had a minimum wage of $12.50. We're now making it $15. And in about 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to have the final new updating. But we want to come and say in this year of 50th celebration that we're going to take up the next phase of this and end poverty for all children in America. And I hope you're going to work with us to get it done and to wear down your political leaders. I love Sojourner Truth, who says all of us like to be big dogs and have press conferences. She once got threatened by a white man when she was coming to speak out against slavery and second-class treatment of women. And he said he didn't care anything more, old slave woman don't care anymore about your anti-slavery talk than for an old flea bite. And she said, all right, I'm just going to keep you scratching. The bottom line is that she said enough fleas biting strategically can make the biggest dog uncomfortable. And the flea corps, we don't need to be big dogs and have big press conferences. We just need to vote, go to the meeting, challenge mistruths. And so we really need to have a massive flea corps for children. That's what's passed, all these laws for children, which I'm so proud of. And we'd only and my daddy used to always say, do the work, let other people get the credit. You know what you do, the Lord knows what you do. Just get the work done for the people who need your help. Get yourself out of the way. And so I do hope that you will join us when we issue this call and then say, what can we do? And I want us to wear down those folks, just bite them. And I wear my 2 ladies around my neck every morning when I get tired and discouraged, Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, and they just wouldn't give up. And so she used to get on the trolley cars in Washington, and they'd put her off, and she'd run to the next trolley car and get on, they'd put her off, and she'd run to the next trolley car. And I loved it because she was the one who answered an old white man who said to her when she was making an anti-slavery talk, that she didn't care anything more about her than for an old flea bite, and she said, "That's all right, Lord willing, I'm going to keep you scratching." We must keep them scratching with our votes, with our voices, with standing outside. That's the way you get legislation. Baby stroller parades did a miracle in getting CHIP, okay? And Dorothy Height was out there in her wheelchair, pushing her baby stroller along with somebody else. You got to fight for your children. They deserve your help. My other lady is Harriet Tubman, and these were illiterate slave women, allegedly, who went north, and you know she didn't just think it was about her. She kept coming back to get other people to take, and she boasted that she never lost a passenger in her Underground Railroad. Now, I don't know any airline or bus company that can boast of that kind of record. But most importantly about Harriet Tubman, she didn't just think it was about her. She kept coming back to bring other people to freedom. And when you get to be rich or middle class, don't forget there are a whole lot of poor children that you're going to have to walk the street with. And so that we need to be doing what is right, but also strategic. I want to just do two things. We need to end the double scourge, the violence of poverty, but the violence of guns. 25 years ago, we did focus groups worrying. I thought I knew what black kids were concerned about and black parents were concerned about. And it turned out it wasn't all the things we thought. It was gun violence. My mouth fell open. Black boys and girls didn't think they would live to adulthood. They were terrified. They're still terrified, folk, because we haven't done our job. And you saw the children coming out, and we've started campaigns, we've done all kinds of things. They need to have adults stand up and protect them. And those of us who are working in schools and in churches, and they're just terrified. I can't tell you, they're scared to walk home from school. They're terrified because they don't have positive alternatives to the streets. And one of the things, we've got some freedom school people, give them safe havens from the streets. And freedom schools would come alive if they were, Sunday schools would come alive again if you had freedom schools and they were reading stuff that's more relevant to them. But the gun violence issue is a scourge. And I hope that we will build on the wonderful voices of these young people over the last weeks and keep at it. We need to retire the NRA from being in charge of our national defense. And we can do that. We can do that. But it's going to take a concerted voice. This is hard stuff. And I won't sort of go into the data on a lot of this, but I'll just give you two facts on children, and just to put in perspective what has happened, and I think how too many of us adults have gone AWOL. But a child dies from guns every 2 hours and 48 minutes. As we're sitting here, you've been in this conference. 8 children and teens die every day from guns. We lose more preschool children to gun violence than law enforcement officers in the line of duty. And black children are still those most at risk. The figure that I hate most, I hate them all, frankly, and we do annual child gun violence reports, so look at the website. We try to keep you updated, but then look at it and then see what you think you can do about it. But I think that the fact that we have lost, I'm looking for one fact about lynchings, here we go, between 1963 and 2016, 65,947 black children and teens have been killed by guns. That's more than 16 times the recorded lynchings of black people of all ages in the 74 years between 1877 and 1980. We need to wake up. And we need to protect our children. And just don't let this gun violence thing go away. And we need to give them safe spaces after school, on the weekends. We need to reclaim them and be there for them and make sure. But we have lost, on average, ever since 1963, 171 classrooms of 20 children. Where is our voice? Why is the NRA in charge of our national defense? We should just really do something to give children a sense that they can live to adulthood. Secondly, I hope we are going to come together and end child poverty, and we will have an agenda for you. Reverend Barbara and I are going to be talking about it together, but we can move this thing along. And you and I have an obligation to honor Dr. King by beginning to try to make sure his dream becomes a reality, beginning with our 11 million poor children. We know what to do. We have the dumbest public policy in the world. We had Nobel laureate economist Bob Solow at MIT tell us how much it costs to maintain child poverty at the levels we have been maintaining it. And he estimated $500 billion in school dropouts, in dependency, in prison costs. Our states are spending on average 2 to 3 times more per prisoner than a public school pupil. That's about as dumb as you can get in terms of an investment policy. And so I just hope we're going to look at our children, hear our children, and you can't segregate violence as we have now seen. I thought Newtown would do it. But we need to make sure that we retire that NRA and make sure that our children can walk the streets and have a sense that they can be safe and have a future that's worthwhile. I want to just end with, when I'm at my lowest, the Lord sends me the messages from the strangest places. And one day I came home and there was this old brown clippings pushed through my door on the front steps, on the front door slot. And it says, everything you need to know in life you can learn from Noah's Ark. And the first lesson was don't miss the boat. And the United States is going to miss the boat to the future by wasting its competitive young people. 76% of our 18 to 24-year-olds can't get in the Army because they can't read, and they have health problems that haven't been detected and dealt with. And so if you don't like them, you don't have to like them, but you should understand it's in your self-interest to see how you can, do something for them and invest in them. And you got to walk the streets with them. And we cannot afford to have 80% of our black children and almost 75% of our Latino children and not many behind in our white children unable to read and compute at grade level in 4th and 8th grade. What's a child going to do if they can't learn, they can't read or compute? Who's going to compete with the Chinese and the North Koreans if our children can't read? And you can't lock them all up, and we're spending 3 times more per prisoner than public school people. That's just dumb. Investment policy is also cruel and unjust. And I have no doubt that Dr. King would be out there leading to say, stop this. And we should be out there leading to stop this. So we're going to miss the boat to the future if we don't prepare our children. Secondly, remember that we're all in the same boat. And we can't lock up every black child and every brown child. We're going to have to still share these streets and these communities, and so it's in all of our self-interest to do it. The third, and I'm not going to give you all of them, but the one that I love it was God working together. For safety's sake, travel in pairs, learn to work together and stop this long range of stuff. Just work together for your children. They're more important than your own press conference or your own position. Let's make sure that our children know we're there. The fourth lesson, which I liked, and which is my favorite, and I'm going to sort of end with that, is that remember, because we're all into this technology stuff, and I hate it. And you can't come in from the top down to the bottom. You got to get out there and you got to pray with people and eat with people and get to know them and build trust. And and that's the way we're going to build the movement. That's what the movements were about in the 60s and earlier. You got to come from the bottom up, and you got to make people trust you and feel that they can sort of work with you and that you've got their best interests. Press conference alone doesn't get you anywhere. And you can go real far, as I say again, my dad used to say, if somebody else can do something not quite as well as you do, you empower them to do that. And just don't worry about the credit. The Lord knows what you do, you know what you do, and so just get the work done. And our children deserve that kind of stewardship from all of us if we can just get our egos out of the way. And the last one, this was 10, but I'm just going to give you one last one, which I think is the key issue that we need to do. And we can turn this around. I'm not going to have my grandchildren fight these same battles all over again. And we just need to get out there and determine in each of our communities that we're going to take responsibility for building a safe and decent America. And so we all are into this technology and all of this new media and new age stuff. But I love this message from this anonymous person, was just remember that the Titanic was built by experts and the Ark was built by ordinary people. And I hope you will just see yourselves as the builders of Noah's Ark. On the ground, in the water, doing what needs to be done, trusting in God's navigation. but just never, ever giving up. Dr. King's not coming back, but he's here with us, and I have no doubt what he would be telling us to do today. So let's celebrate him today, but let's go out and do what he would be doing tomorrow, because nobody's going to save our children if we don't do it. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Bernice. Thank you for all of you who are doing things.